Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining the Growers for Grower webinar today with Heliospectra. I'm Robert Ford, I'm the Regional Sales Manager, and I've got the privilege of working with growers and customers all across the United States and Canada. My main territory is US, west of the Mississippi, and I love the region. I love to speak with all you people. Before we get started, I'd like to provide a quick intro to Heliospectra. We were founded 14 years ago in Sweden by plant scientists and biologists with one vision: to make crop production more intelligent and more resource efficient. Today, the customers across 6 continents. Heliospectra is a global leader in innovative horticulture lighting, custom lighting control systems, and specialized services for greenhouses, vertical farms, and controlled plant growth environments. At Heliospectra, our mission is to redefine nature's potential through innovation, technology, and meaningful partnerships. Our commitment to deliver operational excellence to our growers and their businesses is critical to us. Thank you for joining us today to learn more about utility rebates and incentives to finance your grow operation and keep that operation energy efficient through design. I would like to highlight a few housekeeping items before we get started with today's program. Please enter your questions up in the corner in the questions panel. We've allocated about 20 minutes at the end of the webinar to discuss any questions that you might have. If we do run out of time, one of our presenters will reach out to you directly by mail, so just hit us up there and we'll make sure everyone's covered. This webinar is recorded. A link will be provided in the follow-up email that you will all get. Thank you for registering. We'll also release a new ebook on this exact topic of rebates and energy savings. I just got a preview of it. It is fantastic. You're going to love it. We'll share a link with you in the coming weeks. So we just got to put the final touch on that. Lastly, please follow up on social media as we continue the discussions from this and future webinars. We'd love to have these webinar series that was born out of this COVID era. It's been a great way to connect with everyone. So we love to hear from you. So please connect with us there. From now, I'll introduce our moderator today, Ryan Wankel. He's our grower liaison. Some of you may know him, and if you don't know him yet, I'm glad that you'll get to hear him now. So I'll be back in about 40 minutes for the Q&A. Again, please pop your questions up in that corner chat box, and we'll have at it then. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Hello, hola, hey, aloha, bonjour. Thanks a lot for joining us today, and I am looking very much forward to this subject, especially when it comes to saving money. As Rob had mentioned before, my name is Ryan Wankel. I am a second-generation cannabis grower, and I work in our technical services department in Heliospectra as our cannabis grower liaison. A lot of my work is dealing specifically with helping growers making those transitions from particularly legacy technology and transitioning to LED, and especially when it comes to rebates, but ensuring those growers that they are going to be successful in making that transition today. I would like to be able to, and I'll let him actually introduce himself, Jake from Sustainabis, but you know, I think a very key and integrated part, as you see in these conversations, of a professional and a resource that is very valued when it comes to securing and getting these rebates. But I'd like to pass it over to Jake to give himself give a little bit of brief introduction.
Awesome, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, so my name is Jake Mitchell. I'm the president of Sustainabis, a sustainability consulting group for the cannabis industry. My background is in sustainability consulting for municipalities in the private sector. So I used to build climate action plans for cities, do consultations for private sector companies, like some of my really big ones were like the Cheesecake Factory and Dan & Yogurt, all over the place, using sustainability as an iterative process as it is to help companies become more environmentally friendly, more energy efficient, more waste efficient, things like that. And 3.5 years ago, I kind of saw this need in the cannabis industry for sustainability and better environmental practices. And so I started my company working on it. So my company kind of works in a bunch of different facets with municipalities and working on like educational opportunities and community engagement. But lately, the majority of my work has been in energy efficiency because sustainability kind of has to be practical and feasible. And energy efficiency is a fantastic place to start because it saves you so much money up front. And so most of my contracts now are actually working with utility companies. I'm in an extension of a lot of utility companies here in Colorado, specifically tasked with reducing energy usage in the cannabis industry, cannabis and indoor agriculture industry, not just cannabis. And a lot of that has led to working with rebates. So a lot of my time is spent working on rebates, helping growers and indoor agriculture proprietors work through the rebate process and make sure they get as much money back as possible. Because like I said, you got to make environmentalism practical and sustainable, or practical and feasible. And so starting with a great return on investment project, like any kind of energy efficiency project, especially LEDs with those really, really high rebates, is a fantastic place to start. And so that's where most of my work is today.
And I could say from, you said that you got into the kind of cannabis sector, you said 3 years ago. And, for myself and working early on in the Colorado industry and, working with traditional legacy lighting in 2009 and making that transition, is particularly, I was a client with Heliospectra before working with them full time. But I would really wish I had your services and guidance in 2014. And making those purchases and early on switches. And it kind of leads me really to one of the first topics. And I think it comes from for myself as a grower, but also working closely with management and, ownership and investors. And, it comes to that first kind of question, I think, that comes to the hurdles or the rumors is, as a grower, is it real? Can you really get money? Can you really get somebody to actually pay you, give you money for the lights? And are there these rumors that are kind of around these rebate programs? Do they exist for the cannabis sector in general?
Yeah, and they absolutely do. A lot of the energy companies and utility companies don't quite understand the cannabis sector or the indoor agriculture sector, which is why they hire me. I actually worked at a cannabis grow the first two years of my company operating to get a better understanding of how the system worked and how to grow cannabis and how growers operated, their mentality. And when I started talking to utilities about these programs, all of them have pretty much said, we need help with this. And we want to offer programs to this sector, we just don't know how. So a lot of my work is actually helping them kind of figure that out. But I've seen so much stuff out there where either people think that rebates will come from like their state or come from the federal government, so they don't think that they can apply for them, that rebates come from lighting companies themselves, which is not usually the case either. Utilities rebates almost always come from utilities, and I haven't found a utility yet that doesn't offer some sort of rebate or incentive, or at least some help in installing some kind of energy efficient technology. I remember just a few weeks ago, actually, one grower I was working with in Southern Colorado, some grower from California had posted on Instagram like hundreds of thousands of dollars of rebates available. Just go to this link, click this link, and fill this out for rebates. And it was linked to a utility in Louisiana that was offering rebates for LEDs in refrigerator casing. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of misinformation about who is actually offering these rebates, what is available to them. But a simple call to your utility or checking on your utility's website will usually clear up any of that kind of rumor that's out there. And of course, I can look into it for you too, and so can Heliospectra.
Yeah, it seems like an easy thing in the industry, and probably the more of that misinformation that's going to continue to pop up, because I think we'll probably touch on some if there is cost and upfront involved, but also looking out for the kind of smoke and mirrors out there. And I think that that's a really a really big point of probably a place to start and understanding is that a simple call to your utility company can usually, you know, at least give you, you know, a clear understanding of where to start. And I think that that's where it's important, where you need to understand if you are a grower or if you're a CEO, what's the best way of going about it. And I think we'll, you know, kind of touch on some of that into later topics, but before we, you know, kind of jumped into that, you know, I think you touched on a few things that of course they do exist and they are coming directly from the utilities. And I think that for some, you know, for some people that are understanding the rebate programs, that it makes sense to them. But I think that for people who are just starting to get into this, why are utility companies providing rebates? Why are they, you know, giving growers money to go with an LED type product? You know, it just doesn't seem to sometimes make sense. If we're going to pay for more electricity, why do these programs exist?
Yeah, why are they paying you to reduce their product they're selling? You know, I think you touched on a great point there, and something that I want to hit on before we move on. The first thing is your utilities are your friends. You know, I think a lot of growers and a lot of cannabis companies come from that kind of era of, I can't let the utility find out how much energy I'm using because they're going to find out about my grow. You know, and a lot of growers that I've worked with kind of have this like weird abrasive relationship with their utility because it's such a big business expense. They kind of feel like they're getting screwed in certain ways. But when it really comes down to it, now that it is a legal market, the utility is absolutely your friend. And they will help you reduce your energy usage. And they will, if they have enough growers talking to them, whether it be indoor agriculture or cannabis, if they realize there's a large enough sector in their service territory, they will absolutely start putting programs together if they start hearing from enough people in the territory. So it's really important to talk to your utility and let them know that you want help from them, because that's how they develop these kind of programs that they then hire me to execute. But the reason that they offer rebates in the first place is basically comes down to two things. One, a lot of them are mandated to do it. So like Excel here in Colorado, for example, a private utility is mandated by the state of Colorado to provide rebates. They absolutely have to. It's a legal requirement for them. And usually you're paying into those rebate programs. So if you look at your bill, you'll actually see where you pay a percentage of your bill into the rebate program. So it's already your money. So you definitely want to make sure that you're looking into using it. But the other really, really big reason that companies provide or utilities provide rebates is because it's much cheaper for them to reduce energy in their territory than it is to build new generation. So it's way cheaper to reduce energy in cannabis than it is to build a new power plant or build new transmission lines or build a new transformer. Some economists way back somewhere crunched the numbers and figured out that rebates are overall cheaper to a utility than it is to actually build the new power they need to provide energy to a new sector. So it's kind of a weird thing at first when you hear about it, and especially when you hear about projects where people are getting like $100,000, $200,000 rebates. You hear those kind of numbers and you're like, that's absolutely crazy. That's, you know, over a month of my electricity usage. But somewhere down the line, it works out for the utility and it works out for you. Everybody wins because they get energy reduced and you get a bunch of money back in your pocket.
Yeah, you're really still doing them a favor, and,
yeah, exactly.
and you know, in a way. So as much as that it's like that little bit of extra if you you know, go over you know, using non-efficient forms of energy or systems, that, you know, all of that adds up, like you said, over all of these projects. That little bit of extra that you're paying in money is little compared to them. It's just a drop in the bucket when the larger money goes into upgrading their infrastructure. So, you know, that's, you know, it always makes sense. And from a grower standpoint, I think that that's always been the interest in why I always looked into going into LED myself, was, you know, not only the rebates, but I was looking for an energy in a cheaper way to produce higher quality cannabis. And I think that that's sometimes for myself, that I knew that was the end goal, and sometimes I think a scary approach for growers, because then they still realize, okay, they're still getting incentivized to doing something that is basically helping somebody else, and I think that becomes scary for growers to make that plunge into feeling comfortable that these technologies still work for them and that they're being kind of forced into this box. And so, I'd like to, I can touch on, efficiencies when it comes to, the crops and stuff. But I think first it would be good if you can, you talked about, that electrical way. I mean, you're delivering less light, basically. It's where you're delivering more light with less electricity, in a sense. And in that sense, I think that it comes down to, from a crops situation, is that you're providing more light and less electricity. And from a grower's point of view, you are providing a more efficient light. And if you're providing a more efficient light that is targeted to specific stages of growth, whether it's driving photosynthesis, vegetative growth, and keeping your plants short and squatty and bushy, and LEDs, that LEDs can now provide a more efficient and targeted spectrum for the plant. And I think that that's where that the technology has changed, I'd say, and why that rebates have continued to exist even more is because the technology does exist, and you can produce a very high quality cannabis in a more efficient way, utilizing less electricity.
And that's why the rebates are so good for LEDs, right? Because rebates are primarily based on the energy that you're saving, right? It's almost always based on equipment. So you can directly look at the wattage of equipment versus like baseline equipment. And pretty much all rebates are based on your kilowatt hour savings, right? So, a lot of them are like 10 to 15 to 25 cents per kilowatt hour that you save. And so basically what you're saying, or what you're trying to show the utility, is that, hey, I can get this same operation done using this much less electricity, and then that difference in electricity is what you're going to get rebated for. So an LED, say like the Mitras, for example, are 650 watts, correct? Those over a 1,000 watt HPS, that's 350 watts you're saving right there. And if you're running them at 12 hours a day, multiply that out by 12, and that's just for one light, right? And then you get paid on that at a yearly basis. So you get paid for the energy savings over the course of a whole year, which are like equipment specific rebates. Some companies are even starting to see the benefit of doing rebates for behavioral changes. So I know Excel in Colorado here is running a pilot program right now where they will actually incentivize like behavioral changes. So if you go off peak demand time, which peak demand is when the most people are using the most electricity at once in their service territory. If you stop running your lights at that time, they'll actually rebate you for the electricity that they save, that the utility saves off that kind of whole load. So there are more intensive programs coming out that are going to give you a lot more opportunity to capture these rebates in different ways. But right now they're primarily based on equipment. And so like you were saying, you're reducing the energy to the system while still getting the same plant growth and the same light levels that you need. And depending on the utility, it's either going to be based on those light levels or based on those direct energy savings per light. And then something else to consider too is that the traditional metal halide and like HPS lights, not only is the bulb pulling a wattage, so if you hear 1,000 watt HPS, it's actually around like 1,085 to 1,100 watts, because the ballast is pulling about 85 to 100 watts. Whereas LEDs are just one straight 650 watts, they're using 650 watts.
Yeah, I always remind growers and you when they're saying even a DE versus a standard, because the DEs are even going to be slightly higher than that, just because that ballast has that the draw, even the hood and the connection between that bulb. I mean, you are putting another source, and I know that might be minute, but it is still a systems. And I think we'll talk about some of the systematic savings, because you do have to make those changes from a grower's standpoint when you go to an LED, that you are losing, people talk about the radiant heat coming down off of HPS. And yes, although there is a lot of electrical heat that is getting radiated off of that hood from the electrical heat that's produced off of the bulb, and that's reflected, but there are spectral differences in that HPS. And so one of those main changes that you do is running a hotter room. And it's not necessarily that you're going to be heating your room. It's typically that you're cooling less. I mean, LEDs are still producing, a BTU of heat. It's still standard, but the way that heat is being removed off an LED is coming off the back of the diode, and you're actually then running a warmer room. So you are investing less in HVAC and your overall systems approach. And I think you've mentioned that a handful of times of, the systematic approach, that all of these are very much interconnected. And, by running that warmer room, that's going to act differently on your humidity and how much your relative humidity and air is going to hold. And that's going to change your VPD and everything from your crop perspective. So I think it's very important to, understand all of those differences is super, super important.
Yeah, I think that's such a huge aspect, and something that most of my work is in energy efficiency now, but that's why I'm so thankful to have my sustainability background, because it really gave me this like holistic lens to look at everything through. A cannabis operation, indoor agriculture is a system, and every change you put into the system is going to change how the system operates, either for better or for worse. And so looking at it systemically is very, very important, and actually factors into how much your rebate is a lot. Because if you include just the lights, you're just going to get a rebate for the lights. If you include the whole system, you can sometimes like double or like 1.5 times your rebate sometimes from including the rest of the different changes that are happening.
Yeah, and us at Heliospectra has always, believed and saw direct, very positive impacts by having, that smart lighting technology, and not just with the lighting, but lighting control. And HelioCores actually has implemented when you're especially using DLI and out in a greenhouse and utilizing a sensor and communicating with the sun, and algorithms to actually work in that peak electrical hour. So in HelioCore, you can actually put in during those peak electrical rates, and it'll run and make sure that you hit your target DLI during the most efficient time. So I think of having efficient equipment is the more realistic approach to efficiency. I know that you've always talked, Jake, of how these can be, being sustainable in commercial environments, but I think it's about being efficient and making your operations very compatible together is very important in all of this.
Yeah, and honestly, there's also rebates available for those controllers, those controlling systems, and a lot of times the utility, what we use when calculating rebates and how we go about showing rebates in like a greenhouse setting or something like that, like DLI controllers are pivotal in those calculations, showing how long the lights are on for. We actually I did a project for the USDA up in Fort Collins, and we're able to get them a rebate for their DLI controller. So those kind of technologies are the absolute starting point, right? You can't understand how your system's going to operate until you know what tech you're going with. Go ahead.
No, go. You're right on. Yeah.
Because those systematic changes, like those kind of changes for your system, are going to come from the equipment that you're using. I always suggest starting with LEDs first, because LEDs are going to change how your system operates so much. If your HVAC can make it another 2 or 3 years, another 5 years, put in LEDs first, understand how your system works. And then once you understand how your system works, when you're ready to upgrade your HVAC or your dehumidification, you can probably take the tonnage down, take how many pints per day out you need, because your system is now running more efficiently, and you have to build those pieces out one by one. And I always suggest starting with the biggest return on investment projects, which is quite honestly, LEDs because of the rebates that are available. You want to start with projects that immediately save you a bunch of money, and then year over year keep saving you money until they pay themselves off. And then, you know, when I used to do strategic planning from like a sustainability perspective, I would always start with energy efficiency. I would almost always start with LED lights, things that had a big return on investment, and then would suggest using those savings to then put into more efficient technology over time, right? So if you pay off those lights in a year and a half, that next half a year, year and a half after that, use the savings generated from those to invest in new tech and invest in more efficient technologies for the rest of your system.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, I think that we see you know, different states that are, you know, implementing different codes, and I think that everybody kind of has a different reasons of why they are looking to go in with LED. You know, whether it's from a grower standpoint who's looking to produce a higher quality product with less inputs. I always say a greener way of producing cannabis, or is it from the, you know, financial, the CEO who is looking to, you know, that it makes sense to looking to lower and get a higher return, get a, you know, lower, quicker return on investment, and making their actually becoming more profitable business and sustainable for the future, especially when there's becoming more competitive and competitive margins and the prices of electricities continue to go up. But we want to talk on from some growers, and I think everybody talks about the 36 watts per square foot. And particularly, you know, everybody, we see lighting power density. I think it's the first thing that right now the codes and different places are starting to go with, and we're getting a lot of growers that are contacting us and how they go about it. Can you touch and talk where you see this is going, and really what it relatively is? Is it incentivizing? Is it really pushing the HPS out of the market? And how do you see that working with codes all over in general?
Yeah, so it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because you have the one side of it where not having these codes makes for much better rebates and incentive programs. It's kind of almost the argument of free market environmentalism versus mandated environmentalism. You know, because the places where these codes exist, so the rebates are almost always based on baselines. You know, I usually always use the insulation example. So if the city baseline for insulation for a new construction is R10, you're not going to get a rebate if you just put in R10. If you put in R15, you're going to get a rebate, right? So if the state's energy policy for indoor agriculture is that 36 watts per square foot, or whatever lighting power density that they choose it to be, if you just meet that baseline, you're not going to get a rebate, because the utility companies base their rebates on construction codes. That's pretty much what all of them are based on. So that's why it's important to like go with LEDs now, while these incentives exist, and two, while the utility companies don't quite have a huge grasp on it, which is why they hire, you know, companies like mine to help them figure out what these rebates should be like. And when these codes kind of start popping up, like you see them in Massachusetts right now, there are almost no lighting rebates available in Massachusetts anymore. There's rebates available for like HVAC, greenhouses, all sorts of different stuff. But lighting is really tough because you have to go above that baseline, right? So if you could, you know, like places like California, Colorado, Illinois, you can currently base your rebate based off the industry standard, which most utilities right now are using the assumptive baseline of metal halides and HPS. As that industry standard shifts to LEDs, which it is very quickly, those rebates are going to become less available and not as big as they were before. Because now that baseline is the 36 watts per square foot. So now they're saying that a baseline for a flower room is an 800 watt LED. If you get the 650 watt Mitras, now your rebate has decreased because the wattage has decreased from 350 with HPS to 150 with LEDs. So if you want good rebates, now's the time to do it before those codes go into effect.
Yeah, it's probably why you see so much traction going towards it, and people see that those rebates have started to, you know, wash up in the industry. And in the places that have started to make it, regulation.
Yeah.
And when it's very kind of a very unfortunate situation. So, but if they are going to that realm, and I think you mentioned it, and we talked a little bit at the beginning, but if they're talking to Heliospectra, or when is these ideal times to bring in Sustainabis and an expert like yourself, or of the best way of approaching this from it doesn't matter. I know that we've probably referred a lot to this from being here in North America and in the US, but in a global perspective, I mean, do these exist? But when particularly do you start to look into bringing in an expert like yourself? I mean, the first step was kind of just contacting your utility company, but sometimes people are too busy and they want the extra support.
As soon as physically possible. As soon as you're even considering it, right? Because if you bring me in early enough, or bring in, start asking Heliospectra for help soon enough, we can include rebate estimates in your actual quotes. So you can see what your actual return on investment is going to be with that rebate included in to the quote in the process. A lot of utilities require rebates of this size, like pretty much any LED rebate or any rebate for a large commercial company is going to require a pre-approval process. So they want you to get the funds pre-approved, secure funds, because what they'll actually like physically do is once they have an idea of how big your project is, they'll move funds from the rebate fund over to a different account and reserve those funds for your project. If some utilities don't even rebate after you've purchased the lights. Like if you don't submit for pre-approval first, you can potentially miss out on that rebate entirely. Some go back like, oh, if you bought the equipment within 6 months, that's okay. But the majority of projects that I've worked on almost always require pre-approval. So it's important to bring us in at the very beginning of the process. Even if you're not sure if you want to go with LED lights, you just want to start kind of looking at it in order to make those good fiscal and business decisions. You have to understand what rebates are available to you, and the only way to do that is to start looking at them very early on. So my process kind of starts with contacting the utility, seeing what's available, seeing what the process is like. If they have any caps, a lot of utilities will have like rebate caps. So like here in Colorado, Black Hills down in Pueblo, for example, the cap is 75% of the project cost. So they'll only, like, your rebate might be above what the actual cost of lights is, but they'll cap it at 75%. And those sort of little details are really, really important for understanding how much these lights are actually going to cost you and how quickly they're actually going to pay back. So those little like details, and then figuring out what documentation you need. Do you need, a lot of them require spec sheets, a W-9, a original quote, like all this information. And then once you're actually submitting, you need like Excel files showing calculations. You need to show them step by step, like showing your work on a math exam, basically, step by step the calculations you took to figure out the energy savings from these projects, which needs to be done all before the lights are actually purchased.
Yeah, and usually from my perspective in running a grow facility, that's probably the last thing that I want to personally do as a grower. I've got, my team to be able to manage and harvest dates, and
it's usually a combination of work between C-suite and between their grower. It's a combination of those two sides coming together and working on it. From your experience, Ryan, have you seen what side have you seen doing most of that sort of work? The return on investment calculations for new tech, or what is needed from the grow in terms of new tech? Like who's really making that decision?
I think it's been, a combination of, obviously management, investment, leadership teams. I think that there's a lot of drive in those factors because, they'll typically see the clear savings that's involved, and or also the clear money that's usually going out when it comes to inefficient technologies, and where is that you can really start to be more profitable as a company. And then I see that obviously then there's the direct relation from, I think the most successful cases is obviously when, there is the aspect of cultivation that is all taken into consideration, that it is a systematic approach and the growers need to be comfortable into making those switches. You go into those hotter rooms and, I can tell you from experience that it feels different, when you go into an LED room. For the first little bit. Now I go into an HPS room and now that feels different to me. So it's something that can be changed. From a grower, I think that you're always looking to be, whether it's incentivized or looking to produce better quality of cannabis in an, I'd say a more sustainable or a cheaper fashion. There's obviously an investment that goes into those areas, and I always talk to growers when we talk about the yields and are all the yields there. And yeah, although the yields are their equivalent, I also put on the picture of, okay, I like to look at this, square footage as capital. How much money, how much profit can I yield out of this area? And yes, although flower and biomass is one factor to that, there's also an investment that goes into it. And it's starting to shifting where it's making more clear sense for growers to be incentivized in going with a more energy efficient product like LEDs. And then they're growing better product, which I think is the win-win bonus for it all, which is great.
Well, and that's a huge benefit of going with a company like, Heliospectra, that has experts on their team like you, who has grown cannabis for years, or working with a company like mine, where I've worked from the scientist level down to the cannabis grower level, and worked with research crop labs, and also worked with tons of growers, grown cannabis myself, have my own vegetable garden out in the backyard, and can talk to both growers and to C-suite about how these different rebates work, how to best go about purchasing equipment, calculate their return on investment for them, and approach sustainability and energy efficiency from different levels. Because when you're talking to a grower and when you're talking to a CEO, that conversation is going to go differently no matter what. And you have to approach energy efficiency from people's individual perspective and people's commercial perspective, right? How it's going to affect the grow, how it's going to affect the grower, the operations, the paycheck at the end of the month that you're sending out to the utility company. All those sort of little aspects are why it's so important to work with companies that understand growing and understand energy. You can't just talk to one or the other. It has to be a combination of both of them. And I think that's why it's important to both use experts and also work with companies that hire like I haven't met a lot of LED companies that hire someone who's a second generation grower and can go through all these different aspects with them. And I think that's a massively important part of choosing which company that you're going with. Personally, in this day and age, I will pay more for good customer service at the end of the day, all day, whatever it may be. And so I think that's another important aspect to consider.
Totally. Well, I see Rob jumping on, but I have one more burning question, and maybe it's kind of a two-parter, and the second might be not the easiest, but I'm sure maybe it's one of the questions that have came up with some Q&A, so keep those coming in. But can you give us just a quick, rundown? If I'm a grower, I got so many lights. What are you seeing rebate-wise? What's on those average? I mean, we don't have to see this astronomical number. What are these averages you may be on a per light that you're seeing people spend? And then, can you touch particularly just real quick on maybe I know it's a case-by-case basis on maybe what type of costs are involved or involved with the particular client, but making sure that they understand that obviously, reaching out to you, but just in general, can you run a quick case of, what maybe you've saved, Sustainabis has saved, a client on a per light basis?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one project that I worked on down in Pueblo, which is Southern Colorado, very, very hot area, has, tons and tons of HVAC usage. Their lighting cost was about $180,000 for the lights that they were putting in. Their rebate ended up being $135,000, so covering 75% of the entire lighting cost for them, which brought the per light cost down super, super low. And we also included their HVAC savings in part of that rebate as well. So we calculated the extra savings from the lessened HVAC usage thanks to the reduced heat from the LEDs. And we're able to include that in the rebate process as well. When you look at, like, we'll use like the Mitras, for example, a 650 watt LED, using that over an HPS light, we see on average usually about $243 a year saved on your electricity bill per light at 12 hours a day in like a flowering setting, right? And so if you're putting in, you know, 100 LEDs, that's $24,000 you're saving on your electricity bill a year. Couple that with the rebate, so that's 24,000 you saved that year, minus 135,000 for the rebate. Your payback is like 1.2 years before you're just saving money overall. You know, those lights are paid off. At that point, you're basically just making money, and you can put that extra money into funds to buy more lights, better HVAC, you know, market your LED usage to your customers. You know, a lot of customers in emerging markets care about that environmental aspect. Put some of that money back into a marketing campaign for, you know, your cannabis or your product, show how environmentally friendly it is. But you're looking at like massively significant savings when you switch to LEDs over traditional lighting. And that's the really big thing to keep in mind is you basically take that total cost, right, 180,000, subtract 135,000 from it, right? So now that's what, 45,000 that you just paid for all those lights, and then you say you save about 24,000 to 30,000 a year in electricity. Your payback is like that, you know. So those are kind of what we see on average. I usually see, like, the number I usually give is 25 to 75% of your lighting costs for rebates, straight up, just immediate, and it's a straight check in the mail. Like, a lot of people think it comes like off their electricity bill or something like that. They just send you a straight written check. So,
Wow, excellent. That's a great breakdown, and thanks for that, you guys. In case you're jumping in late, my name is Robert Ford. I kind of open it up and want to thank Ryan and Jake here. We've got some good questions kind of percolating in from the side. You guys touched on a few of them. Kind of one of the biggest ones always that we come across and that we've seen here in the chat today is, you know, I'm used to HPS lights, LEDs are more expensive. What's it gonna shake out like at the end of the day? You know, like, people are unfamiliar with the rebate process, how much that's going to be, how the utility helps. What's some of the best first steps people can take to just even figure this process out, and what does that end up looking like for them at the end of the day? I like how you did a breakdown of this Pueblo grow. It sounds a little extraordinary, though. I mean, is this indicative of a lot of utilities out there, or what's the broader picture look like?
Definitely the bigger utilities, yeah. Some of the, like, really small, like, co-ops don't have great rebate programs, or will have like prescriptive rebate programs just because they don't have the money for it. You know, they don't have the money to be giving out $135,000 for a project. You know, like, one of my projects this year was with the Colorado Energy Office, working with rural cultivators. And it was designed as a way to help small utilities figure out how to handle this energy usage in their territories, because they couldn't pay for a consultant like me themselves, like the big utilities can. And so they'll offer sometimes like $150 per light, just like a straight prescriptive rebate, like per light. But if you're in like a relatively large size utility territory, it's almost always going to be based on those kilowatt hour savings, and is almost always going to be at least, you know, it really depends, right? Because it's based on the kilowatt hour savings. So, like, I've worked on the majority of projects I work on, it almost always hits the rebate cap. So whatever that cap is for the project, like 50% of project cost or 75% of project cost, really big projects almost always hit that cap, especially when you're going to LEDs, because the savings are just so massive. Sometimes, like, when you're in a greenhouse or you're doing supplemental lighting, it won't get all the way up there, but I don't think I've been doing this for, 3 years, and I don't think I've seen a project under 25% rebate. So if you compare that to like say, an average LED cost of $1,100, just throwing a random number out there, even if it's only 25% of that, that's $275 off the light. If it's 50%, that's $550 off the light. So you're paying $550 for the light. At that point, you're paying for an HPS.
Yeah, that really adds up. Those are fantastic numbers.
And then when you get the energy savings month to month off your electric bill, you're saving even more. You have to look at it in terms of that, like return on investment over time is a really important aspect of it.
Yeah, the broader picture is what always matters. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks for breaking that down. What are, you mentioned co-ops there. Are there any, let's see, are there any co-op utility providers that are kind of working well with this? Or maybe another way of saying it is, are there utility providers that aren't worth looking into for rebates? Or any areas or states maybe that have good rebates or states that don't have good rebates? Can you kind of break out the territory for us?
Yeah, I say it's always worth looking into. There's no harm in checking and calling. If you can't see anything on their website, always call your utility representative. Pretty much every utility is going to have a commercial representative for you that is supposed to help you with your energy usage. And like I said at the beginning, they're on your side, they're on your team. It's always worth reaching out to them. States that have had cannabis in large scale industrial agriculture for a long time do have a better grasp on the rebate process. Like in California, for example, Southern California Edison has an indoor horticulture rebate program. So they actually have their own spreadsheets that you have to download and calculate out the PPFD of the baseline lights, which would be HPS or metal halide or T5s, and then compare it to the new baseline of the LEDs. And they have their own formulas and calculations for it because they've been dealing with it for a while. Like Quebec is the same way. But other states that haven't had a lot of indoor agriculture and haven't had these programs for a long time are pretty much all built in forms of custom programs. So in ways where basically I would have to, or Helio Spectra would have to, or the customer would have to calculate their energy savings and then send those energy savings to the utility company, who would then send it to an engineering firm that will kind of assess those calculations, make sure they're up to par, make sure they're actually correct, and then base the rebate around those kilowatt hour savings based on like what I told them basically that this gross saved. The really only areas that aren't going to have rebates, like I said, are those really, really small rural utilities. The if you ever seen Tri-State Power, they're like a really big co-op group, almost like a collective of really small co-ops, and they just don't have the funds to supply these rebate programs. So it's less of a state by state case and more of a utility by utility case. But you do see that breakdown of states that are more mature, have much more detailed programs specific to indoor agriculture, and states that are less mature for indoor agriculture having way more kind of broad programs. And it's kind of hit or miss depending on who's going to give you more money. Because there are, I've worked with utilities before that are basically like, nope, you can't include HVAC savings in this at all. You can't include HVAC and dehumidification savings. It's a direct energy saving from this process. And those are usually the ones that just have like straight custom programs because it's a lot more back-end calculations and they just don't want to deal with it. Whereas the ones who have been doing indoor agriculture for a while usually allow you to include more of those kind of extra benefits in it. But the risk you run in those states where they do allow you to have those extra benefits, most of those states are talking about changing their code baselines. And so if they change the code baseline, those rebates are going to change like that. And so that's kind of like the double-edged sword of custom programs are great because they're going to be around for a while. Horticulture programs, you sometimes get a little bit more money, but they might not be around for as long.
Gotcha. So if I'm tuning into this, basically the takeaway is if I'm buying lights, I should, at the very minimum, at least explore what's going on in my my
Oh,
local utility?
absolutely.
Yeah, great.
Absolutely. There's no downside to checking into rebates,
Right.
and there's no downside to submitting for rebates even. Besides, if you don't end up with the rebate, all you did was waste a little bit of time. But if you do get the
Mhm.
rebate, you potentially get, 25 to 75% of your equipment cost paid for.
Nice, nice, great. Speaking of regionality, question comes in about rebates and incentives outside the U.S.
Uh,
AKA Canada, pretty much. But if you've got insight to other countries as well, any kind of picture you can paint for us there?
Yeah, so Canada is unique in that all their utilities are provincial owned. So they're all actually owned by the province, right? So like in Quebec, you have Hydro-Quebec. Each province owns its own utility, and almost all of them have incredible rebates because they're municipal owned. Like the nice thing about municipal owned utilities is they have this organic, like intrinsic sense of community ownership, right? So like when it's provincial owned, or like say here in Fort Collins, we have PRPA, Platte River Power Authority, which is owned by 4 different cities, and it's owned by the citizens of those cities. It's almost like an employee-owned business, but the employees are the people that live in that territory. And so they have this like nice intrinsic sense of help, like a genuine, like almost want to help their customers because their customers are part owners of the utility. So they tend to have incredible rebate programs. Like Hydro-Quebec, even for their rebate programs, has a software that they had developed that you actually download the software and run to figure out these rebates. It's super detailed, super easy to use because they actually legitimately want people to use it, and they want it to meet the country's climate goals or the city's climate goals, like PRPA and Fort Collins. Fort Collins has really, really strong energy reduction goals because of climate change. And so they work that in to their process. Part of the reason that they have rebates is to help the community reach these goals. And it's the same thing in Canada. I keep using Quebec for example because I'm working with a company up there, but they genuinely, like when I talked to them on the phone, they were like, yeah, we genuinely want people to help to reduce energy usage because we want to reduce the energy usage of the entire province, the entire country as a whole. Because if they, another good way to think about it, if they keep reducing energy in their territory and they get it low enough to where then they can supply it with different forms of energy, they can start switching over to renewables and over to other forms of energy production other than like coal and natural gas, because now they have lower energy usage and it's much easier to implement. So it actually works towards their long-term strategy as well.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks. Couple more questions popping in. One is about scale. What's too small? What's too big? What's worth looking into or not? Where's the threshold? If you're a hobby grower, or if you're, like let's say you're an established grow and you want to buy a sample, couple lights, like 4 lights, is that worth doing the process? Or a home grower picks up a couple Mitras, is that worth doing it? Or we talking 25, 50 lights and up kind of deal? What's that look like?
So home growing is really tough because most home, like residential rebates, you're not really going to get anything for putting in grow lights. Usually residential rebates are like $15 for an LED replacing an incandescent, or putting in a more efficient like appliance, like an Energy Star rated dishwasher will get you $100, stuff like that. So residential, I would say you could look into it, but there's probably not going to be anything there because 650 watt bulbs are not a residential, normality.
Right.
Whereas commercially, I'd say no matter how many you're putting in, it is always worth looking into. The process is going to be more difficult the more lights that you have. Like if you're putting in 200 lights, that's going to be a way harder calculation than if you're putting in 2 lights. But I'd say that when it comes to commercial lighting, there's really no threshold that you shouldn't be looking into the possibility of getting rebates. Because even if you're getting 4 lights and you're spending $4,000 and you get $1,000 rebate, that's still 25% off your purchase. You got to look at it in terms of like those percentages, those saving percentages, and not necessarily just like the flat dollar amount.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's part of starting the process early, and there's no too early to start. We've talked about the ebook that's, that Heliospectra and, Jake in Sustainabis has produced. That will be getting released and utilizing those resources. I know that, Jake's worked on another project with NCIA and myself works with, and Heliospectra are members with NCIA, and I'm along with the cultivation committee. So I think always starting early in any of this and looking and understanding that you do have the support, in the larger prospects and looking at it from a larger point of view. So, utilizing the support around you, whether it's Heliospectra or Sustainabis, and those, free resources that are around you are super important during all of this process.
Yeah,
Nice.
and I'm happy to look into it for anyone. The way that my programs work is that I get paid I take a percentage off the top of the rebate, basically. And if I don't get you a rebate, you don't have to pay me, which is a really nice kind of way of, I think, setting it up. And then I just take a percentage off the top. But whether you're doing a really, really small project or a really, really big project, it's always important to start looking right at the beginning. Because if you're doing a small project, like as a pilot program, that can be like, not only are you testing the lights, you're testing what the rebates look like in your area and how much it's going to lower your electricity and how your HVAC is going to respond. You're testing all these little things, so you might as well test all of them at once. And like Ryan said, there are resources available to you out there, specifically in terms of rebates. The Heliospectra rebate and energy efficiency guide that we're going to be releasing here soon is a fantastic resource and actually goes through the steps you should take for looking into rebates. And then from a more environmental perspective or just an energy perspective, the two resources that I usually recommend out is one, the NCIA white paper we just released, which is a deep, deep dive into the environmental impacts of the cannabis industry, the best practices and policy considerations for the industry, as well as the Denver Cannabis Best Management Practices Guide, which is another document that I helped write with the city of Denver that is specifically a best practices guide for cannabis and treating the environment right while growing cannabis indoors, and has a really, really in-depth energy section. And it's Denver specific, but it can help any grower for sure. So those resources are available. You just got to tap into them.
Nice. That tapping into it's a key element of bandwidth, right? Like, a lot of the people running facilities are pretty busy and tapped out. Like, if they need help, what's a good way to start that process by working with you or another group that hounds these rebates for them? If I was running a facility, getting rebates would be critical, but it would also be kind of like maybe psychologically in this nice to have zone where after seeing this rebate, like, I got to do it. Like, if I'm running a grow, I got to get rebates for this. So how would I go about that if I'm already bandwidth constrained by reaching out to you? Scalia. All right. That's it. That's easy.
I always say, it's like I was saying at the beginning of this webinar, I will pay more for customer service. Personally, I a lot of times choose who I'm working with based on my relationship with them and the customer service they provide and the way they treat me and treat their customers. And so for me, a big, big aspect of it, if I worked with a lighting company that wasn't willing to help me procure rebates, I wouldn't work with them personally. So talk to your lighting vendor, talk to the companies that you are, trying to figure out who you want to go. When you're looking at LEDs and trying to figure out who to go with a company that's going to help you procure rebates, one that's going to build lighting maps for you if you need them, one that is going to introduce you to the right people to help you with rebates. Talk to your lighting rep, and then reach out to my company. My company does this all the time. It's our primary focus right now. And I will hop on the phone with you, figure out which rebates are available to you in your territory, see what that process looks like, and go over the preliminary info with you and what's available to you, and then you can kind of decide if it's worth your time or not. If your utility only provides like 5% of project costs on your rebates, it might not be worth it, but I'll look into that for you before you even start to pull that trigger. So it kind of just is a process of investigation up front.
Well, great. Jake, you're a trusted partner at Heliospectra. We appreciate you helping out our clients and helping out with this webinar today. Thank you so much for your insight and vision. And Ryan, as always, you're awesome. Thank you. Everybody on the webinar, thank you for attending. We definitely appreciate you. Look in your inboxes for a recording of this and some follow-up info, and we'll have that rebates presser come out in the coming weeks. So if you got any questions, give us a shout. Otherwise, thank you so much and have a beautiful day.
Thanks so much for having me, Heliospectra. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Cheers.